Hey there! Welcome to Millennium.Milestone Presents, a site dedicated to storytelling in books, movies, video games, and other exciting genres, where I deny any rumors that had anything to do with Tom Holland's and Zendaya wedding. Absolutely not. Do not believe the rumors. They are absolutely false. Don't know what you're talking about. No way, no how. Well, after taking on one juggernaut of a film known as The Odyssey, and watching the backlash go back and forth all over on that film, we're on to another juggernaut that's ready to go head-to-head with The Odyssey right now, and that's in the name of Spider-Man Brand New Day. Let's get into that right now. Set 4 years after the events of No Way Home, Peter Parker lives alone and is erased from the lives of those he loves. While fully devoted to protecting New York City from any mounting dangers, pressure triggers a surprising physical evolution that threatens his existence as a powerful new threat emerges. Also, with the pressure of seeing his old friends move on without him, this sudden change in Peter becomes something he may not be able to control. However, that internal transformation might also be the only thing that could stop a powerful, unseen villain threatening the city. Now, it wouldn't be that easy for me to just simply ignore the fact that a lot is riding on this movie from Kevin Feige, especially since this is the only Marvel movie coming in to save the day before Doomsday, which is coming out in December. So how did that work out? Well, after watching the film, I can certainly say that this is definitely an excellent Spider-Man film. If you ask me if it's excellent in any other regard, well, I'll get into that a little bit later, but let's get on to what I thought was really excellent about this Spider-Man film to begin with. Well, like I already mentioned in the narration, Peter returns to life without anyone in his life to begin with, which sadly mimics how they're treating him in the comics, where it seems like he doesn't have anyone or anything in his life. So that's how they try to play it out. Here Peter is trying to stop some kind of a utility vehicle, a military utility vehicle I should say, and turns out as he finally pulls the tank open and sees what's inside, turns out to be an old lady driving. Now, that is kind of funny in its own right, but something is going on with this person as a mind jumping begins from this person to quite a dozen other persons throughout. The sequence of events leads to Peter discovering that the mind jumper, whoever this is actually trying to free none other than Scorpion, who has been in jail for quite some time, since all the way back in Homecoming.
Oh, come on!
Yes, I know, I'm mentioning spoilers here. Just bear with me a little bit. They're going to be light spoilers because, hey, I got to talk about the film somehow. Cut me some slack. Now, this sequence, right off the bat, does establish a few things that we have seen in the previous Spider-Man films. For instance, we have seen damage control, which was previously shown in Homecoming, and they're brought back once again, and we're introduced to a new character. We're introduced to William Metzger, who, in the comics, and again, this is a light spoiler, there's not heavy spoilers yet, but I want to mention that William Metzger is a character that has been known to be part of a hate group that really does not like a certain sector of the Marvel Universe, which I'm not going to mention here because, again, I would delve into heavy spoilers later on in this movie. And much in the same way, if you've seen Captain America Civil War, it's a very similar setup where the Department of Damage Control is, well, practically welcomes Peter, or Spider-Man I should say, into their sector and want to work with him. So keep that in mind as we get further into the movie. Further to establish a little bit more of the status quo, you of course come across Peter finding Ned, or, you know, his token best friend from the past few movies, along with later on MJ in this film. Neither of which continue to remember Peter from their previous life after the events of No Way Home, and are living their lives pretty much mundane and normal, with hints that they still have some kind of obsession with Spider-Man, even though they don't know Peter's identity in this new world that they're in. Wanting to somewhat reconnect turns out to be a bit of a disaster for Peter when he discovers that MJ is now not alone anymore. The revelation triggers some sort of traumatic event in Peter where he ends up finding himself not where he thought he would be. Hanging upside down in a web cocoon, Peter realizes he can now shoot webs out of his wrists, and this of course freaks him out and makes him realize that something is terribly wrong and he needs to fix this as quick as possible. And much like any MCU Spider-Man, Peter spends most of the majority of the film trying to not confront this problem, if at all possible. Now, I'm not going to mince words here. I was a skeptic of Destin Daniel Cretton taking over directorial duties from John Watts, who had done the previous trilogy of Spider-Man films. His last credit was Shang-Chi, and that was a box office bomb, so I have to be even question if he was going to be able to pull this off. And thankfully, I don't know what kind of team he had behind him, but apparently he put together a really good, solid Spider-Man film. And again, I want to emphasize here, this is a good Spider-Man film. One of the themes that I think it handles very well is handling loss and being alone, and thinking you can handle the stress of being alone for a very long time. And that's one of the things I think was really well done here with Peter. You see his struggles of wanting to just keep everyone out of his life so that they can be safe, but it comes at a cost, just like anybody who does anything in life. Out of the Spider-Man trilogies, I would have to say this is my favorite performance directly from Tom Holland. I feel like this is probably the most genuine version of Spider-Man we've gotten. And it's not to say he hasn't done a good job. I think he's been very charming, and he's just right for a teenage, growing up, coming of age Spider-Man.
But!
All right, I get it. You're looking at me with disdain and thinking I'm about to dunk on this film. Believe it or not, I'm not trying to, and I want to be clear, I enjoyed this Spider-Man film for the most part. But again, this is where the critiques come in, and I do want to warn you, heavy spoilers begin right about now, so if you don't want to be spoiled by the rest of this film, I think probably towards the very end of the film, I stopped talking about spoilers, but I'll try to get a timestamp noted right here so you can skip over to that part. But here we go. Alright, first and foremost, while it hasn't been entirely egregious, and I think it's been limited to a no part, this is a minor critique, not a very major one. The race swaps are still a bit annoying in Spider-Man here, and they just are a little bit sometimes jarring that way. I mean, obviously the most notable one is still that of MJ. I'm not a fan of Zendaya's portrayal of MJ, even if it is Michelle Jones, as it was noted in Homecoming. The fact that you're trying to push away the redheaded original MJ is egregious, and I still am not going to forgive Marvel for that one. And then even Ned, again, I like the character Ned, but he's in the wrong Spider-Man film I think he should have been in. He should have been saved for Ultimate Spider-Man, basically Miles Morales, when he came around. But hey, we have Ned here nonetheless, but he's the least of the problems in that regard.
Wait a minute! Who are you?
Oh, I could definitely tell you that. That is a cameo appearance from none other than Cindy Moon. And if you're not familiar with some of the later runs of Spider-Man, some of the ones that I'm not too fond of, this is from the original Sin story arc of Marvel, where they retconned Peter's origin story to include another character that became the radioactive spider person. And for those of you that think that I'm just hating on this because of the race swap, it's a little more egregious than that. It has nothing to do with that at all. It actually has to do with the fact that, number one, Spider-Man is Peter Parker. Peter Parker is Spider-Man. There's no definitive changing of that, no matter how many times you try to ram it down my throat. However, the other part that I should mention here, and this is another spoiler from another comic, so if you don't want to be spoiled, you might want to click away here. Cindy becomes a love interest of Peter, so if any of you guys are Zendaya fans, you might want to take that into consideration here, but that's just me. Now, going into cameos, because there are tons of cameos in this that we do get in Spider-Man Brand New Day, and the first and foremost one we do notice is that of Frank Castle in this. And I gotta admit, Frank Castle did pretty well in this film. There are parts where I'm a little bit not happy with that they utilized him for, but his, interesting friendship or whatever you want to call it with Peter is kind of interesting. It kind of is reminiscent of the early Han Solo and Luke Skywalker type of friendship. So I did kind of enjoy that. But this is Frank Castle, and unfortunately when you do take him out of one genre of style of storytelling and put him in something that's a little more lighthearted, it is a little jarring, but I am going to be forgiving of it because, again, this is a cinematic universe, so you do want some connective tissue here. And Frank, at least for the beginning and mid parts of the film, he was not bad at all.
But!
However, and this is a spoiler here, so you might want to, click away, he is responsible, though, for what does happen towards the end of the film, where he does shoot Spider-Man. And that part really, really angered me because, again, we haven't gotten to the very end of this. I'm not spoiling anything specific to it, but I do want to just mention that it is a crucial part of the story that he shot Peter, and the way it's framed really does not hold well. And that part really did upset me when they did use Frank in that fashion here. Next up is Professor Hulk. And initially when he came out in Avengers Infinity War and then Endgame, I was not a fan of the Professor Hulk persona and thought it was a very big miss that you don't have the classic Savage Hulk involved early on. And I guess it brings him back a little bit, but at the same time, you had a great opportunity here to utilize not just the Hulk and Punisher, which you had here. You could have had almost a trio of characters, and you could have thrown in Wolverine here, maybe, but again, that might have been asking too much. But you could have done something here special where you could have done a nod to a classic team up of 4 characters that have teamed up together in Marvel Comics here. The Hulk's presence in the movie is, I guess it's integral to the plot, I would even say that, but at the end of the day, it wasn't something that changed anything fundamentally, other than Peter trying to stop the Mind Jumper from utilizing the Hulk to rampage through damage control. The other annoying problem, and again, this is still in the lighter end of spoilers here, is that of cameo of villains that could have been utilized in this story. Marvel, I'm really getting annoyed with them when it comes to this aspect here, but they really seem to not want to commit to classic villains here. Because at the very beginning of the film, you had Tombstone, you had Tarantula, you had Scorpion, all in this movie, and they were just barely in this film for even a second. And you even threw in The Hand, which, what the hell is this? Seriously, look at it. Look at it. I mean, really, look at it. What are we doing with this junior league of ninja toddlers here? What is this? I mean, seriously, you couldn't have legit ninjas in this movie, but you throw in these toddlers. It's not funny. Stop laughing. Now. There was one other thing going back to the rampage of the Hulk and damage control in the damage control building. At one point, when Frank was in there, he got taken control by the Mind Jumper. Again, I'm trying to keep that person's identity quiet because there is a big spoiler here for those who may not want to be spoiled just yet. And for one moment, and this really annoyed me later on, but for one moment, I almost believed, based on this shot I'm showing you right here, that we were getting the Hobgoblin in this. And it's disappointing because that would have worked perfectly with what happens later on, but we kind of got a nod to him maybe here. Again, this is just maybe a possible Easter egg and nothing else, and it's a nothing burger, but it was kind of annoying to see that and not see that get fulfilled. All right, I'll compose myself and get myself back together again. But now it's time to talk about the heaviest of spoilers here. So right here at this timestamp, you might, if you don't want to hear about the main villain that's being utilized in the story, we're going to talk about the one and the only, and again, click away if you don't want to hear about this, Jean Grey. That's right. The villain of this entire story is Jean Grey. Never mind that we had Tombstone, Tarantula, Boomerang, and other characters thrown at the beginning of this movie that could have been featured as main villains. But we get Jean Grey of the X-Men. Now, I get why they're doing this. I get the connections. I get the desperation in Marvel to get to X-Men because of other issues that they're having right now with lackluster MCU films that clearly hurt them in the long run. But this was, I will admit this, I don't have a problem with Jean Grey. I'm a fan of Jean Grey, though I prefer other X-Men characters. And she is a good introduction for the MCU. And I will even admit, the pieces of this that worked for this movie. And let me get to that first for positive things of Jean Grey's appearance. But number one, when we are introduced to Jean Grey is the sister of yet another telepath, which is a different retcon from the comics. She and both her sister Sarah Grey, who is also introduced in this movie, both have telepathic abilities. So she learns from Sarah how to hone them, which I don't have a problem with that in that particular sense. There are stories of Sarah Grey in the early comics where she was had slow level, at least an X gene mutation in her body, so that is plausible to have that here. She never exhibited mutant abilities in the comics, but she had the X gene, and that alone became a problem for mutant hating groups, which will be talked about a little bit in this, where they had captured her, and ultimately she died in the comics from these mutant hating groups. Here, this becomes a bit of an issue, not so much with Spider, because this is another dynamic that I did love. I love that while Jean Grey was very powerful in this, she knew how to use her mutant abilities, she was not that powerful up against Peter. Because mind you, this is a Jean Grey that's new to her mutant powers. She's learning how to use them, and has just barely begun to learn how to mind jump. So, at the beginning of the film, she tries to control Peter, but ultimately this gets spoiled because Peter's spider sense is that powerful that she can push her telepathic abilities back. Now, if Jean was much older and more honed in, this might not have worked, but here, Peter was the dominant persona in this, and that part I did like, that Marvel didn't try to water down Peter's importance in this compared to Jean Grey as well. In terms of storytelling with this dynamic, while I was not a fan of Jean being the main villain, especially even a complicated villain, which is something that I get very tired of, that Marvel or most movies today don't seem to want to commit to a true villain. I liked how Peter handled Jean's trauma of wanting to regain her sister again, and finding out, and again, this is another big spoiler I'm about to mention here, that Jean finds out that Sarah is killed at the end of this movie. Jean could have gone, semi-Phoenix here, or the way of Scarlet Witch here, but Marvel, I guess, learned from their mistake with the Scarlet Witch, and instead, Peter did something that was noted in the beginning of the film. When Jean tried to mind jump into Peter, she almost got into a memory of him in Aunt May, which that alone I'm going to have to touch on another point, but we'll get to that. The memory of this serves as something that actually helps Jean to confront her trauma of losing her sister and eventually coming to terms with what happens here. And I will admit, that part of the film was really good. It actually really helped to mitigate some of the glaring issues with the film, because again, we got to go back a few things here. At the beginning, when Jean is brought into this girl is terrorizing a federal building. Keep that in mind. She actually planted a bomb in this building. So already you're creating problems where you're supposed to be making this person sympathetic, but she's doing things that real villains do. And while it's not connected to Jean, we're going back to Frank a little bit here. This is the part where I mentioned at just after this, Frank is trying to stop Jean. Early on, Peter had told him not to kill Jean, and later on, Frank sees no other choice, no other recourse, but to stop Jean at all costs here. And with a sniper gun, he tries to shoot Jean, but Peter's spider sense gets in the way of it and takes the bullet for her. Again, the framing of this really bothers me, because again, this makes Frank look like a mutant-hating person, and then now has to apologize for doing that. Something that Frank should not have to do in a situation like this, because this is the Punisher, and you shouldn't be watering him down this much in that regard. But this also kind of hurts Jean's character a little bit too, because again, you're giving reasons for why Jean should be killed, which is already a problem when in comics and even in the movies in the early Fox X-Men, she became the Dark Phoenix. How are we still making the same mistakes with Jean by putting her in these situations again where she does things that mitigate or result in her needing to be stopped at all costs? So, and again, I'm going to admit this is a glaring problem, but it doesn't take away the overall enjoyment of my film. I want to be very clear about that. I didn't like this part. This part did really bother me because one of the problems I noticed with Marvel through a lot of these films is they still seem to not be able to understand that their audience is male dominated. So when you continue to do this trend of making females being the central role in a film, it doesn't help it. This is why we liked villains like Dr. Octopus, like the Sandman or Venom. These are true and true villains that we love to hate. And again, this is the problem that Marvel always seems to have, is they don't want to commit to legitimate villains that terrorize you, that make you fear what could be the unknown. The closest we got to that was the Green Goblin in the last film. And even that, to some extent, was a little slightly lackluster. But here, Jean is not meant to be a villain at any given point. And putting her in this situation did not really help her character to be sympathetic. I really did not sympathize with her up until finally Peter talked to her, through the mind jump that he allowed her to do. That was the smartest thing that Peter did. And now that we established that, let's get on to something else here. Going back to how I enjoyed that this was a good Spider-Man film, I did love that Peter was being put through the ringer, but for the right reasons here. Number one, he still was trying to recover from having to lose all his friends and have them all forget about him and do everything by himself. I loved how they also made it clear that that choice comes at a cost. Even Frank's presence in the film helps to hone in that idea, which is why I'm forgiving of him being in this film, because now Peter has someone to look at as to what he could eventually become. No different than Frank. I'm not saying that's a good thing entirely, but for this particular film, it does help Peter's character quite a bit to grow from being a loner to eventually doing what, unfortunately, is an issue in its own right. The return of both MJ and Ned finally knowing that they once knew Peter.
Really? Really?
I mentioned this with the Mandalorian and Grogu, how the separation of the two characters was kind of important if you wanted to keep audiences in anticipation of something good. And this is another example, again, of not understanding your source material very well. This could have been a good breaking point to introduce Peter to new characters and to eventually come back to MJ and Ned at another point. You could even have saved them for the eventual arrival of Ultimate Spider-Man or Miles Morales, if need be. But again, you spoil it by just quickly erasing the ramifications of what Peter's choice is by bringing him back. Now, that being said, I do recognize they're not fully back. They know that they once knew Peter, but they don't full on have his memory. So they did justify it to some extent, but I still think that was an unnecessary story bit that needed to be addressed in this movie. Now, I know I haven't much mentioned about Mezco, who actually is a villain in this, but it's a weird choice of a villain because Metzger in the comics is someone that I need to mention a little bit. He's a real mutant hater. Like, if you saw the picture, he clearly doesn't look like the actor who's portraying this character. Let's get that out of the way. And it is a strange choice to swap out a white character that hates mutants for a black character that now hates mutants, which was done before in the Fox X-Men with, I believe, Bolivar Trask, if I remember correctly, was swapped out for a black actor, which, again, I didn't have a problem with that because sometimes some race swaps are okay as long as, number one, it doesn't affect the overall story or the main characters, and they're just characters that they're not super integral by their skin color to the story. But going back to Metzger, he was a very incredibly bland villain, and you don't even truly get his motivations other than that it's damage control, being a corrupt bureaucratic organization. And again, I'm getting sick and tired of this nonsense that you cannot have true villains in this story. And you had done, of all the Marvel Comics characters you have available at your disposal, Spider-Man has a very full rogues gallery of villains. There's no excuse that you cannot use a legitimate villain in a Spider-Man film. I don't care what justification you have. You tell me how Metzger is a better villain than Green Goblin, how Metzger is a better villain than Venom, or any of Spider-Man's villains that he's faced off with. You tell me why he's better, and I will shut up right now. You can tell me that in the comments, please, by all means. Now, much again, I'm faced with kind of the same type of situation as I did with the Odyssey, where I didn't love the Odyssey, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that not to go see that movie. The same goes for Brand New Day. I have my grievances with this movie. I've already expressed them, and I'm not going to go any further than that. But I am going to say that I did enjoy this film. I definitely enjoyed this film much more than Superman starring James Gunn's movie. I think that this version of Peter Parker is a much better version. I wish we had gotten this a little bit sooner because this definitely honed in a lot of the things we've been missing from some of the previous iterations of the MCU Spider-Man that we've had. So for that, this Spider-Man is going to get a just right on the edge of decent to excellent for me. You know, I'm not going to knock this film. You definitely will enjoy this particular story because it does have great themes that I think are really relevant to storytelling in a movie like this at all. But again, like I said before, you're welcome to tell me what you thought about Brand New Day. Did you love it, hate it? Did you think some of my takes were bad, good, somewhere in the middle? Or you have something else that I didn't even think about with Brand New Day? And I know I didn't mention a few other things that are in here, but for the most part, I think I've mentioned at least the best things that I think were needed to be mentioned about Brand New Day. So like, share, and subscribe, and you best better believe I'll be back for the next one.